Oh, guys, this is the most shocking and unhinged reports that I have ever seen. I mean, preliminary reports relative to investigation. Yeah, again, we're speaking about Air India crash, Boeing 787. We have the data coming from investigation with pictures and other stuff. Let's go step by step to review it. And after all, the speculation in media, which appeared a few days ago, was not the speculation. Actually, it was the real information that the fuel control levers were placed in cut-off position. Yeah, you have this picture showing them not in cut-off, they are in normal run position, but during the stage of initial takeoff and climb, one of the pilots, moved those fuel control levers to cut-off. Whether he done it accidentally, whether he done it intentively, they do not explain. Well, here in this report they say that there was the airworthiness directive relative to the switches, the fuel control switches released, which involves the lock-in feature of the fuel control switches. It is also interesting that Air India suggested inspections were not carried out, but it's not relative to the Boeing 787 airplane. Here we speak about Boeing 737, and this airworthiness directive is not mandatory one. Here we have its number, but it is mentioned in this report just to highlight that the Boeing 787 has almost identical switches, and there is somehow the probability for pilots to accidentally switch those to cut off. I think you already saw this image before from many of the reviewers. So those switches located on the pedestal, the central panel between pilots, and they look like that. So I don't know how you can accidentally actually select them to cut off. I've flown Boeing 737 myself. There are two types of the switches actually in Boeing 737 NG, and all of them are kind of robust. You need to pull them first and then select, pull and select. I don't see how you can accidentally actually select them to cut off, as for me, as for Boeing pilot. Plus, there is one more protection, the guards here, which mechanically would not let you do it. Like potentially if you put your hand or palm around here, if you try to secure the thrust levers in takeoff position, maybe you may select them off, but there is the great but. It's also explained in this preliminary report of investigation that those fuel control switches were cut off not immediately, so not accidentally, like by one movement. They were switched off one by one. And yeah, guys, by the way, my name is Dennis. I'm the airline pilot, at least I used to be. I've flown Boeing 737. So yeah, this is the official report. I'm not gonna go through all of the details explaining the general information. Let's go straight to the business. For example, relative to the flaps, they were in position 5. It was already confirmed by investigation. You may see the slats that were extended. So yeah, actually the information about the flaps was correct. Some experts say that pilots selected flaps up instead of gear, but let it be like that. The investigation report shows us the real position of the flaps, and here we have it in position 5. Here we have the flaps quadrant, which is similar to Boeing 737. The landing gear, interesting, it was down. Before we spoke about the possible retraction of the landing gear, that crew positioned the landing gear to up because the landing gear carriage actually pointed down clearly. Why it was like that with the landing gear position down? Kind of strange. And yeah, the most important thing are the fuel control switches. You may see them in normal run position, but before at takeoff I told you that they were switched to cut off by pilots. And here's the brief information about pilots. What I want to mention here, that before we got this data, just this, so total flying experience on type, it was published before. Now we have the total flight experience, so captain 15,600 roughly hours, first officer 3,400 hours, good experience. And here's the state of the flight data recorder. You may see that it was definitely damaged. However, Indian authorities managed to get the data out, not sending this box to United States of America, which actually expedited the analysis. And here we have step-by-step review of this aviation accident. So before there was the flight from Delhi, crew stated that there was the stop position XDCR, some sort of the failure message. They put it in a tech log, and there was the troubleshooting conducted, so the aircraft was released to service in less than an hour after arrival. You may see 547, 640. I need to dig down the maintenance manual for the airplane to really state you what was the issue there, but sometimes you have the failure messages. They were troubleshooted, cleared by maintenance crew, so it's not critical for the flight. I mean, this message. And as we see, it's not the main cause of the crash. So here we have the information that co-pilot was pilot flying and pilot monitoring was a captain. It means that the first officer controlled and focused on piloting of the airplane, and the pilot monitoring, this time the captain, was manipulating with the systems. It's the normal delegation of the roles in the cockpit division, like checklist, radio for pilot monitoring, also operations in cockpit, and the pilot flying manipulates the airplane and responsible for the aircraft configuration. So he or she gives the order to pilot monitoring to extend flaps, retract gear, and so on, so on, so on. There were 230 passengers, quite a lot of the number. The airplane was not overloaded. That's their takeoff weight was, and that's the maximum takeoff weight. You can see within the limits. The calculated takeoff and climb speeds were V1 153 knots, we rotate 155 with 162 knots. Here they say that the aircraft taxied to the runway and lined up with the back track, so they took the full runway length. The aircraft roll was normal. According to the data, V1 speed was reached 153 knots, we rotate speed, then you start the rotation, 155 knots were reached, then the aircraft airborne sensor sent the signal to flight data recorder. The maximum speed that was reached is 180 knots. Immediately thereafter, for the freaking unknown reason, the engine number 2 and the engine number 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position, one after another. It's very important, one after another. The engine number 1 and 2 began to decelerate from their takeoff values as fuel supply to the engines was cut off. Understandable, because those switches are usually used to start the engines and to cut them off, then you're on a parking stand. Yeah, you use them in non-normal situations as well if you have, for example, engine failure or other significant problems with the engine like damage, separation, fire. But cutting them off at this very critical stage would lead to the imminent crash. And honestly, guys, flying the great part of my career on Boeing 737, which has, I would say, the similar switches, I don't believe that it could be done accidentally. Yeah, you may throw stones at me saying that I blame pilots, but here in this case, like I said before, yeah, that it's better not to blame pilots because some people say that they retracted flaps instead of gear, but here, like the clear evidence, engine number 1, engine number 2, fuel cutoff switches transitioned to cut off one by one with a time gap. And guys, it's not 0.1 second, so it's not like very fast, it's 1 second. So one, another one. You cannot do it by accident, guys. I don't believe in that. So yeah, I'm not saying that 100% one of the pilots killed everyone out there and plus people on the ground, but it is one of the great possibilities judging on this evidence provided by Investigation Bureau. And yeah, I'm ready for the stones coming to my side from aviation community. I don't fucking care. It doesn't look like something which could be done by accident, because those are the classical safeguard Boeing switches. To select, you need to pull them and select down, or pull them and select up. You know, it's pity that I don't have the access to the airplane right now. I would like to experiment, you know, to press them really hard, trying to accidentally switch them to cut off. I think that some of the pilots might do it with their airplanes if their airplanes are not powered. It's better to do it without the ground power or auxiliary power from the airplane, but never ever I had issues with those kind of the switches, at least on Boeing 737. Again, both switches have stop lock mechanism. You cannot switch them accidentally just like that, especially one by one. What is also very crucial and interesting that in the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other why did he cut off those switches. The other pilot responded that he did not do so. Did he lie? I don't know. And whether this pilot who was asking saw how the other pilot cut off the switches. And still I give like the small percentage for the accident selection of those switches to cut off, but this percentage is damn small, especially because of this time gap between switches go to cut off. So there was 1 and another. Again, guys, those switches, they don't have any sort of the motor. I more tend to believe that it was the prompt action. So yeah, we have the new CCTV camera footage showing the red deployment immediately after takeoff, the N2, so the RPM of the engine start to decelerate. Then some of the pilots start to put fuel cutoff switches back to run one by one. There was the relight attempt from the automatic system, but the engines, they need lots of the time to spool up again. And obviously at this very low altitude, you don't have the time. Later on, there was the Mayday, Mayday, Mayday call, and aircraft crashed. The relative information is here just for investigation, how it will ongo. They will also discover different features, but the main thing is understandable. Everything is connected with those fuel switches or fuel cutoff switches. Speaking about the airplane which I've flown before, we had those kind of they call engine start levers. So this was the mechanic of those, and later on they were changed to 787 like fuel cutoff switches. Well, if you check out, for example, 737 overhead panel, the logic is the same for every switch. So you need to pull and then select. Pull, select, pull, select. You select them on, off all the time, thousands of cycles, and still they work like a clock. So I do not see how those fuel cutoff switches could be warned with operation. It's impossible. There was, however, the airworthiness directive, but it wasn't mandatory one. Like, okay, check out your logs there because we had some report, that's it, but it's not affecting the entire fleet. And again, because of the just bumpy takeoff, they cannot move to cutoff position. It's impossible. Those switches are very light themselves. They need external action. They don't have any motors. Again, no, you select them off. And because in our case they were selected one by one, guys, it is very suspicious. Yeah, the story is kind of crazy, as you may see, and it may recover some of the analysis of pilots' personalities who were flying this aircraft there. But at least we know the main cause. The airplane was commanded to switch off the engines. The fuel cutoff switches were set to cut off, and it was done by someone in the cockpit. Inside, there were two pilots. At least judging on this communication that one of the pilots asked another why did he cut off the switches. It is all what I want to say. We'll have some extra data or extraordinary information. I'm gonna update you on this case, but probably the next update will come in 1 year or something after they publish the full investigation report. But again, the main cause we already know.